small, intimate session. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Somnath Batabyal. And I had a very difficult task, Anita, to do. I'll tell you why in time. But the two things Anita and I share in common. One is we have the same agent, and we have the same publisher. Unfortunately, that's where any of the similarities end. For any writer, Anita is a daunting prospect. The amount of books she has written, essays, poetry, short stories, works for children, the awards, National Film Award for Script in English, Sahitya Academy Award for Children's Writing, shortlisted for the Orange Prize. The list goes on. And I must tell you, of all the sessions I've been doing, Anita, this has been the most difficult. The amount I sent to read was just daunting. I came in from London and I got this 40 books. Out of them, about 18 were yours. So it's a really daunting prospect. Where do we start with all this huge, huge stuff? Should we start with the book launch of Idris? Please, Anita.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I can't see a soul because the light is in my eye. So anyway, it gives me great pleasure to launch my own book. Now,
I get the copy, right?
Usually, you know, all the book launches I've done, I have very eminent writers, you know, unveiling the book, holding it up.
That was me. That was supposed to
You
be.
just sit down there quietly. Okay. And then I just stand there like this really novice, you know, this is this brilliant moment in my life and so on. But anyway, this is the first time in 15 years, or 16 years and 15 books, the first time I'm launching my own book. So here it is. Idris, Keeper of the Light. You don't get a copy because I have to give it back. And
that's how bad it is.
I'm so unprepared. It's actually, you know, fascinating. I don't have a copy of my own book. And I've been launching it in God knows how many cities and how many festivals. I've lost count. And so normally a book is provided to me, and I'm yet to have a copy of my own. So that's a
Publishing
status.
well.
Right.
But let's start with your work and have conversations around your work. I'm going to ask you a slightly complicated circumlocutory question. Bear with me on this one. You know, Mark Twain once said, write what you know. I've always followed that dictum. That's one. On the other hand, very recently at the Calcutta Festival, Rana Dasgupta says that writers should be free to write whatever they feel like, despite where they come from. Given your vast writing spread across so many genres, do you actually think writers are free or to write what they want, or are they bound by circumstance, where they come from, what they have read?
Well, okay. I think that it's actually an amalgamation of both, because I think writers ought to be free to explore the worlds that they want to write about. I mean, just because you are a woman, you don't write only women-centric writing, or if you're a historian, you only write historical fiction or historical biographies, whatever. I think what's important is to try and write about the milieu that you're familiar with, because then you put in nuances which is not probably available to someone who comes in from the cold.
Right.
So I think it's basically a writer should be able to have the gumption to explore worlds that they're not familiar with, but try and ground it within the landscape and the mindscape that they understand best.
Okay, just to kind of try and explore this a bit more. One is that Kerala keeps on returning as a motif in several of your novels and short stories, even when it's imaginary thank you. Even when it's imaginary villages and towns set up. The reason I ask this is, why does it return, how comfortable you are with it returning again and again, and also the fact that, you know, recently I just found out from your publisher that your village in Kerala, the library, gave you an honor. Your books have been translated into Malayalam. are one person who seems extremely grounded in your particular situation and your background, and you write from there. How difficult is it to carry this kind of groundedness through all these different genres?
Well, you see, the thing is, I am originally from Kerala, but I really didn't live there for too long. So to some extent, the Kerala that I have written about in fiction is pretty much a Kerala that I have discovered over the years. So I came to it pretty much as someone who was from there but was trying to understand it better. And the more I understood it, something about the place, it's a cussed place, you know, something about the cussedness, the contrariness about it made me want to write about it. And I think because I fell in love with what the place is and the mindset of the people there, that I think I found it quite easy to kind of take what I wanted from Kerala, no matter what genre I was writing in. It didn't matter to me. I mean, my poetry collection is titled Malabar Mine, but it's just basically about a single poem, and the rest of it is poems that could be set anywhere else. You know, so various things that I've done, I mean, the various forms of writing that I have explored may kind of dwell in the realm that I think is Kerala, the way I know it, but it doesn't always have to be there.
Okay, talking about the various forms of writing, as a writer, how would you approach a screenplay? And 3 months later, think about writing a children's book. Is it difficult to come back to another genre, to novel writing, for example, when you have gone so far away?
I think I'm just schizophrenic, you know.
That's not an answer.
So, no, I mean, to be very serious, I just think that I'm a writer of the moment, you know. So when I'm writing, say, a screenplay, at that point, that's the supremost thing in my mind. Yeah. But the moment it's done, I turn the page and it's over. And then I go into whatever next catches my fancy. So it could be a children's novel, it could be an essay, it could be anything. I mean, whatever forms that I choose to write in. And I think also, see, one of the things is that, you know, and which is one of the reasons why I believe that writers shouldn't really take up courses, is that, you know, when you're writing about a particular subject, at that point it's the most important subject in your life. So you will go to town and talk about it, and you will, you know, wax eloquent about it. But the moment it's over, it's over. I mean, I have to kind of, you know, relegate it to my personal space, which is why I would never be an activist of any sort. Because I don't think I would be able to sustain that belief in whatever I have for a long time. Because if today, for instance, in Lessons in Forgetting, I've talked about feticide. But the next novel I wrote was Cut Like Wound, which is a crime novel and which kind of dwelt about the world of transgenders and so on. So at that point, my focus shifted. So I think it's primarily the subject just takes over my mind, and then that's what I'm thinking about. But when I have finished writing and have put my pen down, I still write longhand, and I put my pen down, it's over.
Right. You say a writer should not pick up causes, and this was a question I was going to come back to later. But you have been at the forefront. I know of this, the Sabrimala episode when you went out and spoke so much about the Lord Ayappa temple.
Yes.
And you were really at the forefront of talking about misogyny, male hegemony. So there is that activist side of you too. I know you were all over the papers.
No, not really. In
Okay.
fact, this, for those of you who don't know, is this temple in Kerala, which doesn't allow female devotees to enter. I mean, female devotees in their fertile years to enter. Now, there was this whole thing about should female devotees be allowed, and I actually went the other way around and said no, because it's a place that is so filled with, I mean, if you thought yesterday the Litfest grounds were crowded, think of it some 200 times, and the space is even lesser than this. That's a number of people who are there, men, you know, bare-bodied men, and people are being shoved and pushed. And I said, what woman would want to go and be part of that madness?
Right.
And so for talking about that, I got into serious trouble because I was seen as someone who was, you know, regressing the female cause.
Right.
right?
Okay.
So my point of view was that if a god doesn't want you, then why would a woman want to go there? So,
No, but then the point therefore being, which I was trying to come from, is therefore you do have causes and you do kind of, put your view. But at the same time, you say as a writer, one shouldn't. So how do you make this distinction in your personal and political and your writing?
well, I try and keep my writing devoid of political ideology to the extent of what I believe in. But because I think fundamentally, as a writer, my primary function, apart from telling a story, which is the primary function, but there could be a kind of secondary function, which I think is probably a more long-lasting function, is of holding a mirror to the society and saying that, hello, this is the world we live in, and what are we doing about it? I mean, I'm not going to change the world, but I do want to ask questions about, are we asking questions about the way we live our lives? So that for me is the only political philosophy that dictates my writing.
So, but would you kind of think that fiction has a political purpose? In a
Well,
large...
I mean, there are stories that take up causes and kind of, expand on it and try and put it within a human context. So the cause becomes that much more real and immediate. And I do think that if well written, a novel could probably do the business of a political tool. But I'm not so sure that it's handled very well, because writers ultimately are slaves of their imagination. And it's very easy to kind of deviate away from fact and throw in a little detail simply because it makes a story interesting.
True, fair enough. Just to keep on with this political, and since you've been writing for a long time from India and as a woman, I'd like to place this question, why are there so few female writers? Forget Arundhati Roy is the only one I can think of writing of India at that stature. Why are there so few female writers of the stature of a Vikram Seth or a Ghosh, despite so many writing? Why does this happen?
Well, I would think you should, I don't think there's a dearth of female writers.
No, there's
writing.
not a dearth, but I was talking about, the kind of...
Acceptance, Well, I think you need to just look at the literary establishment.
Yeah.
Literary establishments still believe that women writing always, contain their subjects to subjects that are not important enough in the male world. I mean, I'm sorry to sound like,
No, please.
I'm this polemic, but I believe that, and I've heard, of this writer called Lionel Shriver,
yes,
right? Who's written wonderfully, the kind of gumption in her books of what I think any man would write. Now, when Lionel Shriver herself sits up and says that she's not being taken seriously enough, so, other writers from, say, India, who still have to kind of find their feet first in the Western world, in terms of you're looking at Western world's acceptance, you realize that, one, there is this whole thing of having to be seen as a writer as per the Western world's definition of who a writer is. And then secondly, there is also this whole thing of the male establishment, male literary establishment, which somehow doesn't see female writing as important enough. Now, in my mind, if you take two writers, if you take Lionel Shriver, the kind of subjects she writes about is pretty much the same kind of subjects that Paul Auster writes about. But look at the stature difference.
Okay, so having written from 1997, your first book came out?
Yes.
Yeah. All this while, how do you see the patterns of publishing, which has gone through a huge change? Some of the top publishers in the country are women. How do you see it unfolding in India? And also, when you talk about Western acceptance, how important is it for Indian writers being published here now to be also published in the West? Because it's the entire thing about too many books are being published in India, not all of them very good, and most of them being rejected in the West. So you, as a writer, how do you see this scenario unfolding?
Well, I was one of, I think, the fewer fortunate writers whose works have been extensively
Yeah.
translated and published abroad. And I think to some extent sometimes the readership that I have internationally is internationally in translation,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm talking of in Spain or Italy or France and so on, is so much vaster than the ones that I have in India when writing in English. And again, when my books, when they're translated into Malayalam, for instance, again are received with a greater, I think, greater sense of appreciation than I probably have received, I think, in English. And which completely defeats me because I don't understand it at all. Because obviously the readers who say sit in Poland or say in Spain, say South America, Colombia, and someone sitting in Kerala, what do they have in common? They have nothing in common. But just the thing that they're able to identify a story when it's being told well. But the moment you're writing in English, it requires a whole other set of trappings. Who are you? Who do you network with? Where are you from? All that comes into play, which to me completely defeats the purpose of writing. You know, because as a writer, you write because you feel compelled to write. You need to, you know, find a voice for the stories that are simmering in your head. And you expect to be read at the same level, you know, as a reader and a writer, the only connection is the story. But I realize now, as I'm growing older and wiser, that, you know, that there's so much more to it than just writing. And if you are not able to do the rest of it that is required of you as an author, then there are times when you feel irrelevant.
Okay, before I go back to the particularities of your writing, I'm going to just ask one last of these general questions. And about 60 literary fests in India now, you know, all following from Jaipur. And you, as a writer who has traveled extensively abroad in festivals, how do you see this development? We're talking about networking, this publishing world, you know, the festival circuit. Now we all go from one festival to the other, and we compare notes on who has been invited where. So where do you see, you know? And if we talk about festivals abroad, say the Hay Festival, how would you kind of talk about this scenario right now unfolding in front of us?
See, one of the things that, okay, the festivals, you know, I mean, in the last 5 weeks I've been to 5 festivals. And the reason is,
I've been only to 4.
Yeah, no, the only reason I did this is because I have a new book out. And you know, I love traveling, but not traveling on promoting a book. So I thought the best thing to do is to finish it all off in one shot so that for the rest of the year I can forget this whole business of festivals and having to be seen and, you know, all those things. And I can just go back and write whatever I want to write. But the thing I realize is that, you know, with a great number of festivals happening in India, it is also becoming something else. You see movie stars at most festivals and you wonder why, because this is not a movie star who's writing a book or has a great love for literature, but they just brought in like showgirls, maybe, sorry, and they just brought in there, and then, you know, so there are all these iconic writers, you know, I'm talking of very senior writers who somehow don't receive that kind of adulation that a Bollywood star does. And for what? I mean, this is supposed to be a literary festival. At least here can writers be the superstars and not movie stars. And so I realize the more number of festivals I go to, it's completely, I'm sitting at a literary festival and saying this, but I think it's completely pointless, unless of course you're a new writer and you want to understand and feel the excitement of it and everything. It's wonderful, then it's a great experience. But when you've been writing for some time, as I have been doing, I go to every festival with a great hope, because see, this is something about writing in English. You know, a writer writing in English living in India has absolutely no idea who is reading him or her. It could be anybody, anywhere in the country. Unlike, say, if you were writing in Hindi and you know who's reading you, or if you're writing in Malayalam and you know exactly who's reading you. So you go to a literary festival with a fond hope probably sometimes a desperate hope that you will meet readers who know your work and can relate to your work and talk to you about your work, and that's all you're looking for as a writer. But very often at festivals, you don't see that happening. Everything else but that happens. So I would think, I mean, I made a rule for myself and I've broken it this year. One book festival a year, that's it. And
You've already done 5.
I've broken it this year. So maybe for the next 4 years I shouldn't.
Just to add to your conversation on festivals, I landed from London, I came into Calcutta early morning and I was picked up by the festival organizers. And I asked this young boy, how is the festival going? And he said, sir, very well. So I said, oh, who are the writers people are coming to watch? And I was very excited to then join something which is going very well. He said, no writers, only Usha Uttup came, so everyone has come. So you just kind of feel very deflated very quickly. But okay, you brought in a very important point about audiences and whom you were writing for. If we even take out the language and the different languages you're translated in, but let's talk about the different genres. So when you're writing say a children's short story or a novel, or when you're writing an English screenplay, how do you start imagining your audience, or do you imagine your audience at all?
No, because I don't know my audience. I end up writing for myself first. In fact, you see, what brought me into writing is a very simple thing. I wanted to write the kind of books that I like to read. So in many ways, I became my own first reader. I mean, I am very hard on myself. So if something doesn't, I'm not happy with what I'm writing, and I'm very quick about cutting out things, then it won't even go past the first stage. So when I'm writing, so that became my working practice, to write for myself. And so if I was, for instance, working on a screenplay or a play, then what I would do is actually because it's a different medium, it doesn't stay within the pages of a book, then I would have it read out. So then I know if the dialogue is sounding false, if the pitch is perfect and everything. So apart from that, I don't allow external influences to come into my writing. So the reader to me is an unknown entity at the point when I'm writing.
Okay, I'll push you a bit more on this. You're almost saying that you imagine the self as the audience.
Yes.
Okay. So how difficult is to switch this self from a child when you're writing to somebody who will be sitting in an audience in a theater hall, or somebody who's reading quietly in Bloomsbury your book? Right. So you have to switch the self too. How do you do that?
Well, with children, I have a very simple theory. What I do is, before I actually write the story, I tell the story to nephews and nieces who are available. Okay. And if it works, only then am I going to write it down.
Right. Okay, that's a very interesting one. Okay.
Yeah, so I actually become this, in the tradition of storytelling, I actually tell them the story, and I realize then what works and what doesn't work. Because, children are completely free of all the other things. They're not influenced by hype, they're not influenced by who has read you or who hasn't read you, what the critics have said or slammed. It doesn't matter to them. If they are not interested, you can see a child will pick up a pencil and start playing with it, or turn away and say, can I go watch TV? Whatever. So if I can hold a child's attention, then I know that it's working.
But I'll continue pushing, because that's with the child. But when you can start writing, you have to imagine yourself in. Again, the theater, as you're writing screenplays. So I'm trying to kind of probe into your inner consciousness as an audience, as a reader, and switching selves. Can we extrapolate a bit more on that?
Well, you see, okay, again, one of the things about writing longhand is that, okay, for every day, if I do 1,000 words, the next morning when I come back and I read what I've written the previous day, and very often the only reaction that I want for myself is that I look at it and I say, oh my God, did I write this? Can I improve on this today, or can I do better than this? Only then will I be able to keep those pages. Otherwise, those pages go. Because at the risk of, how people grow on saying, I'm so brilliant, aren't I, kind of thing. I need to work on that kind of theory, for me to be able, because I don't have an audience in mind.
Yeah.
So if I should read that and I should say that, where did this come from? Only then do I know those pages have passed muster. And then I go forward with the story.
Cool. Okay, I mean, we've been waffling on. Can we now have a few readings? I mean, I'd love to, if you would read from your poetry collection, a couple of poems, and then we start talking more specifically on genres and essays and stuff. So a couple of poems, maybe?
Right. I'm going to read one of my favorite poems, and which has been kind of, I think, put in just about every anthology that I know. So it's called You Said, I Agreed. Let us be friends, you said. Let us be friends, I agreed. Let there be nothing more, you said. Let there be nothing more, I agreed. I made no declarations, no promises, you said. You made no declarations, no promises, I agreed. It was a minor aberration, a detour, you said. It was a minor aberration, a detour, I agreed. It isn't as if I did anything, you said. It isn't as if anything happened, I agreed. We came out of it with dignity, you said. We came out of it with dignity, I agreed.
Wow, wow. Kya baat. That's brilliant. Absolutely stunning. Wow. Wow.
And you want to cut like wood?
Yes,
Okay.
just kind of let's do a cut like, and maybe also from Idris a bit, yeah?
Okay, Cut Like Wound is a crime novel.
Literary crime novel.
Literary crime novel. And I'm just going to read a tiny little excerpt from it. The market that had sprung up for Ramzan was on the other side. Akka wouldn't let them go that way. They won't like it, she said. Why invite trouble to sit in our laps? She told one of the others who claimed the bargains were better there. Besides, even our best customers will pretend they don't know us. It's their holy month and they bring their families with them to see the shops. We'll stay here near the bus stand and go towards Cubbon Road. The others will be there as well, Akka said, leading them in that direction. Others referred to the eunuchs here. The crowds pressed against her as she and her companions wove their way through. She felt a hand caress her waist and cup her ass. She leaned into the caress, but it was over even before it had begun, leaving her feeling used, dirty, dirty, dirty. A nerve snapped, a pulse throbbed. She saw Akka sneak a look at her, but she didn't let any of what she felt show on her face. And when the moment arrived, as they all stood near a bangle vendor, flirting with him, trying on bangles, scouting for prospects, she slipped away. She felt him follow her down the dark alleyway. She swung her hips, leading him on. He knew what she could offer him. She smiled and suddenly paused. She turned her head to smile at him. Her smile froze. There was another man following him, a man who laughed when he caught her eye. Go away, she snarled. The interloper laughed, a high, shrill laugh. He thinks you're a woman. Tears welled up in her eyes. Then she pulled herself together and said through clenched teeth, Why do you say that? I'm a woman, can't you see? The interloper giggled, in which case I'm the Prime Minister of India. He tapped the puzzled man on his shoulder. She's not a woman, she's a chakka. Didn't you see a group of them near the bus stand? The man's face fell. Disgust replaced lust. He walked towards her and scrutinized her carefully. He's right, you're a fucking eunuch. The interloper smirked. But if that's what you like, Mia, come to me, I can do better. The man hawked and spat on the street. Fuck off. I don't want you sucking my cock either. As for you, he turned to her. I'm not desperate enough to fuck a man in woman's clothes. Go find some fool who'll be taken in by this. He gestured at the fullness of her bosom and the curve of her hip. He flicked a pearl drop with a forefinger, watching it swing like a pendulum. Nice earrings, but you know something? They don't suit you. You're not pretty enough or woman enough to wear them. She stared at her feet where the blob of saliva had come to rest. She heard his footsteps as he hurried down the alley. She was nothing. She was filth. She was scum. She had been so happy this evening and then.
Ooh.
Can we do Idris now?
Shall we come in a bit to the,
Yeah,
let's
okay, right.
just then a couple of questions. Just that we flip between your poetry and the novel. A silly question perhaps, but which of the genre are you most comfortable in writing? It's a fan-like question.
Right, okay. Poetry, very simple. I write poetry when something really, troubles me. It troubles me. It could be a nice way of troubling me or a bad way. So it's basically a trigger to which I need to find immediately some kind of cathartic release, and poetry becomes that. So it could be something that I've seen, something that I've experienced, something that I've heard. But with my fiction, I'm more careful in the sense that it's a much more thought out process. A novel has to stay in my mind as just an idea for almost a year to 2 years before I actually start working on it. So it is something that I spend a lot of time dwelling upon eventually before I start writing. So the scope of the novel, of course, is so much wider and vaster that it is my preferred form. There is, I am the supreme creature. I rule the canvas there. Whereas with poetry, sometimes there are limitations, and I know that I have to make the poem work, I need to make it pithy. With screenplay and plays, you know exactly that it's a medium that requires to, that it needs to be, where basically they say less is more. You don't say enough, and most of it is acted out. And as a writer, then I feel a little bit at a disadvantage because, of course, I would like monologues after monologues.
So which one are you most comfortable in? What do you think? The novel is your favorite form?
Yes, novel is my favorite.
But your essays also are quite different from many of the political essays. Very quiet ruminations about certain things which...
my essays are probably the closest to the kind of person that I am.
Yeah.
Okay, the kind of rumination, the kind of subjects I write about, it's Anita who's writing that. Whereas when I'm writing a novel, which is why I said earlier, I'm schizophrenic to some extent. I actually feel somebody else is doing the writing, and it's not me. I mean, there's just this being who just takes over and writes what I need to say.
So perhaps, all these questions which I was trying to ask you to understand the different selves, so it leads to this easy answer that you have, I'm schizophrenic. So I know, so that probably, you had given it away at the very beginning. I should have taken you for your word. But talking about poetry and spontaneity, there are so many schools about novel writing, non-fiction writing, but very few about how to write poetry. I mean, can people be taught to write poetry, or is poetry spontaneous?
No, I actually don't believe in fiction schools.
Stephen Fry has a book on how to write poetry.
Or creative writing schools either. Because, what it can do is it can teach you how to hone your craft. But ultimately, you need to be able to have something in you, not just a felicity for words. You need to have something beyond just being able to coin 6 words together. You need to have an idea. You need to have an idea that is supported by a strong belief in whatever it is that you're doing. And there is something that, an unconscious force, an unconscious power that drives a writer into creating exemplary pieces of work. Otherwise, it's just going to stay at one level and never rise above that.
So all the spending of thousands of dollars in Colombia are misguided?
Well, I just think it's...
The form can be
it's like, the form can be improved upon. It can open your mind to ideas. It can bring you into contact with writers. All of that, it actually basically is a technical know-how. But for that moment of inspiration, that moment of genius, it has to come from within.
Within, right. Now, in this, again, back to your writing career, from 97 to 2013. Many years ago at a bookstore opening in Goa, William Dalrymple was saying that how his toes curl up when he reads his early writings. Now, how does Anita Nair of 2013 look at the Anita Nair of 1997? And do you think novel writing, any other forms of writing, you kind of learn step by step, or would you want to change things about your early writing? How has this career progressed?
Well, I don't have that toe curling moment because what
Really
what I didn't believe in, I never allowed it to come out. Okay, but the thing is, I do know that as a writer, I have matured. I'm much more assured. I'm less apprehensive. And there were, earlier, of course, I have a couple of first readers. I needed their stamp of approval before I would send it out to my publishers. But now, not really. Now I'm assured enough to actually share my book when it's halfway through with my publishers and say, tell me, do you think it's working? That's all I need to know. Because I know whatever isn't working can be fixed. I mean, I am assured enough to do that. And it's not because of how my books have been received, but simply because I've been doing it for so long that, you know, there is a certain, I think, natural fluidity that has come into my writing.
So besides confidence, does anything else change? Politics, how you look at the world?
Well, earlier I used to think that I would only write about worlds I know very well, right? Which is the first question.
Yeah.
But I think with every new book, I have allowed myself to open up and explore. And so now I will write about diamond prospecting as if I was there and I was the mine master. Or I will write about pearl fishing as if I was the one diving into the, you know, the water to fish for pearls. I am able to now completely lose myself into the characters that I'm creating, which goes back to saying that I'm even more schizophrenic than I was to begin with.
Okay, now when you kind of move into this other world, as you say, how much research does it entail? How long do you work on characters? Where do you go out? How do you observe? Is there ethnography involved?
Well, characters have to happen. Once they happen in my mind, then I substantiate and build on that character with research, which means, and I'm quite a, I mean, I'm almost like a research Nazi to the extent that I don't, you know, let me give you an example. In Idris, for instance, I have talked about a particular walk where, you know, because now when you go to Kerala, one of the wildest hedge plants that you see there is the lantana. And it's very simple for me and easy for me to just put it down and say he walked past a hedge of lantana. And then I realized that lantana was introduced into India in 1815 by the British. So there was no lantana in India before that. And my novel is set in 1659. So I couldn't do something, I mean, unless you're a botanist, you wouldn't know. But I need to know it for myself. So which is why I kind of push myself into looking up details. Every single detail has been fact-checked at least 3 times over. Also because I'm not a historian. I don't have historical, I mean, I don't have tools that historians use in terms of index cards and stuff like that. So I would be reading everything 3 times all over again just to make sure that I got the facts right. So I think research then becomes so critical. And what research also does is it throws up interesting situations. It throws up interesting stories, which I am then able to kind of bring into my writing.
I mean, there's a question I ask you as a writer. Would you also be reading fiction as research?
No.
Is it always non-fiction?
Non-fiction.
Factual?
Yeah, factual stuff.
And would research be conducted while you're writing a novel, or?
I begin with the research. So for instance, for Idris, I was researching it for about 3 years before I actually began writing. But once I began writing, there was research happening parallelly also, because sometimes, you know, I would come to a point as I'm writing and I realize I don't know anything more. I mean, I don't know enough about it, which meant I would have to stop and, you know, research it that afternoon so that the next morning I have enough material to write a scene out.
Okay. I mean, I think we're reaching slowly the end.
So
would we have a
quick reading from this?
Take your time and read, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
I'm going to read a tiny little segment which is set in the diamond mines of Golconda, which strangely enough now when I've been looking up, they don't even know where this particular mine exists anymore. And this is the mine that threw up what is called the Great Mughal diamond, and which is not the Kohinoor, which is a diamond which initially in its original form was about 753 carats, which finally a lapidary who was from Venice, it had a lot of inclusions, which are basically falls. So while he was cutting the diamond, he cut it down so much, finally it came down to about 200 carats. And Shah Jahan was so upset that he fined the man all his money that he had. And historical accounts say that it's fortunate he didn't lose his head, you know. So, and then Nadir Shah came, and the diamond went missing and they don't know where it is. If it has been broken up and sold into various bits, or if it is resting in some collector's vault somewhere. So anyway, this is just a tiny bit. When the heat of the midday had subsided, Idris returned to the mine. The pounding was complete. The women filled the fan-shaped trays from the earth that was heaped into a pile at one end and passed them to the men who stood outside the wall of the enclosed area, winnowing the soil again briskly and with great vigor. The dust flew redder and thicker, for the clay had been pounded well, and when all the dust had separated from the earth, the men flung it back into the enclosed area, and the women spread it carefully with their hands as if it were rice, and the loss of even one grain would be a serious depletion of wealth. As dusk fell, the workers finished the final winnowing. Early next morning, they would go over the earth methodically and search for any diamonds that lay hidden there. "You've had a long day," Golla said. "You should go home. The boy and your man must wonder where you are. I'll stay back here with 2 of my men. We'll stand vigil so that no one enters the mine at night. We'll begin work in the 2nd hour after sunrise. There will be a feast before that. The mine master and I have made all the arrangements." Idris looked at him. "Why, Golla?" he asked softly. "What makes you so?" He groped for the right word. "Wala, loyal." The man blinked. It was as though he had been asked if he would like to fly to the moon. "I have eaten your salt and you have paid for my time. It's my duty to do my best for your welfare." Golla spoke brusquely. "Do not question loyalty, Ayana. It is insulting to the one who offers it and to the man who deserves it." Idris nodded, chastened by Golla's dignity. In his own way, Golla had taught him so much in so little time. "I will return early and I'll bring Kandavar and Sala with me," he said, seeking to lighten the air. "They will not forgive me if they're not here to spot the diamonds. They haven't seen a diamond ever." "And neither have I," Golla said simply.
Thank you very much. Definitely the book to buy at this festival. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is open. One of the front.
Every writer has a lot of manuscript which do not make to the publication. It does not come in any of your books, and those written material have a lot of valuable stuff, but they don't come into any kind of publication. Have you ever thought about your sheets which are not getting published?
Anita has got everything published.
No, actually, yes, that's the sad part. I mean, sometimes you get letters from editors who've got a new special supplement or something coming. They say, "You must probably have a story tucked away in some forgotten, drawer of your cupboard." And I said, "No, actually, I don't, because everything that I've written, I've published. So there isn't anything."
For once, the question is invalid. One up there? Yes. Can somebody?
Ms. Nair, good morning. I am a writer of YA fiction, and I would like to ask you, don't you feel that the YA fiction is too that's the demand for very simplistic language, young adult?
Young adult, YA, okay. Young
So,
adults.
don't you think that the current demand is for really very simple, one unidimensional character, and the book very simple, and nothing much going? So it is a huge challenge to cater to that kind of a audience. What do you suggest? Because you also write for young people.
I actually think that we do children a whole injustice by actually thinking, or the publishing industry thinking that children just want very simplistic writing. What I realized, I have a son who's a very voracious reader. I mean, now he's grown up, but as a child, I've seen him, what interested him. And I realized that, they like complexity, and I think as a writer, it is our dharma to really not cater to what the publishing industry needs, but to cater to what the child needs or a young adult needs. And so if you're asking me for a suggestion, then I would say that the best thing to do would be to just write the way you think it should be written?
Look, guys, I'm the moderator, so I get to ask one more question on this one. Sorry, it's my flow. There was a huge debate you had in Chennai about the book being a product or a work of art. Can you just take us through this conflict which writers do face? I mean, it is a conflict. That
Yes.
ultimately, you would want it to see it out there, so therefore becomes a product. But the process of writing, how do you divorce yourself from this?
Well, you see, very briefly, I was on a panel discussion, which was basically about
Came
making.
to blows almost.
Yeah, well, and two of the other writers are the newer writers who write commercial fiction. And to them, they almost follow a formula in the way that they write. And so because of that, they see the books, they see the book as a writer, as a product. And my problem was that, well, here you're at a literary festival. At least here for once, can you stop ceasing to calling a book a product and just call it a book? It has a name. I mean, it's not a refrigerator or it's not a toaster. So can we just call, and so basically my thing is that, okay, as a writer, I have sunk in so many hours and so many years into the writing of a book. To me, it is everything that I went through when I had a child. And I cannot refer to my child, even though, God knows how many children are born every day. I cannot refer to my child as a product. You know, we go through the whole process. But a book is a child for me, and I think it is a work of art. You put your heart and soul, and even if it's a commercial novel, you put so much of yourself into it. So to denigrate a book by calling it a product is basically denigrating yourself. And I would think, as a writer, you have a response. If you've decided to become a published writer, you have a responsibility to make sure that the book is available and people know about the book to some extent, but not to the extent where that becomes the supreme focus of writing. You write because you are compelled to write. You don't write because you think it's the shortcut to fame and glory and fortune.
Adding to this, about 4 years back, I was moderating a session with Vikram Seth at the closing ceremony, and he had said something very interesting. He said that you write only what you want to write, what comes from within. And the reason he was not being able to write the much touted novel for a long time. But once you have written, fight for the most amount of money you can get. So, divorce the proceeds from the writing part itself. Okay, the next question. We'll take one here, up there. The lady up there. Would you hold it closer up?
This is about your novel, Cut Like Wound, which I really enjoyed reading. And actually, I have two questions about it. Are you going to write a sequel? Because usually crime novels come in sequels, and there are part 1, 2, 3, 4. And the second thing is, I was it's a strange title, Cut Like Wound. It doesn't follow a kind of grammatical structure for a novel title. So could you tell me why you chose such a arresting title?
Well, cut like wound, very simply, is a term that medical practitioners use when they, like the way doctors put PX on top the prescription kind of thing. So when they're writing a post-mortem report, before it's written out properly, they normally write it as CLW, which is something the medical practitioner in India writes, and the policeman understands immediately what it refers to. So I have a brother who's a doctor, and he, so I was asking him something about a wound and, what serrated edges, etc. and all that, and he said, oh, cut like wound. And so I said, well, I just love the title. It was a very unusual term, unusual phrase, and I thought, well, I'm going to use it. I know that I've had so many people ask me, but you required a hyphen, you required an A, etc. and so on. But it is a forensic term. It's like saying no parking, so that kind of thing. And
Sequel,
yes. Now that Idris has been, let loose into the world, I can go back to Inspector Gowda and start on the next one.
Brilliant. Yeah, question there?
Yeah,
hi.
So, it's a split question really. Two questions. So it's about your screenplay writing. So first of all, you've talked about not taking any rigorous sort of training to do any particular form of writing, but screenplay is very, very stylized. Like you said, it has been distilled to few words, and so there's a format. You know, I mean, some of it is provided by the software, but did you do any kind of work with industry professionals before you wrote your screenplay?
No, not really. In fact, the only thing that I was quite insistent when the film was optioned was that I said, you know, I will do the screenplay. I might have to kill myself in the process, but I will do it because I have, you know, created these characters, and in the creation of these characters, I've put in so much thought into the psyche of each character that a screenplay writer who would come in from the out, I mean from, you know, from wherever, who would come in from the outside and then try and get into the mind of my character might not do so with the same ease that I would. So what I did do was, after the first draft, the director and I sat on it together, and then he said there were things that I needed to knock out because I didn't know things like, you know, each scene had to have these many minutes and all those things. I had no tools. I didn't even have a screenplay writing app, which everybody apparently uses these days. I'm still writing longhand.
Final draft, yeah. And then the other question was, being the writer yourself, did it help you do the dialogues easier, or were you more distracted by the fact that you knew these people so well? And you know, like you said, you know, one can talk ad nauseum when one is talking in a monologue, but when one's putting it into a screenplay, it has to be much shorter. But did you feel that you had an advantage of writing something that was your own to start with?
Yes, I did. I did because I thought, you know, I think as the writer, I felt it was easier for me to decide what to keep and what to leave out. And the thing was, unless I trusted the screenplay writer as much, I wouldn't be able to feel comfortable about their judgment of what to keep and what to leave out. And ultimately, I am human, so I would all the time feel that he didn't get it right or she didn't get it right. So just to save everybody a lot of heartache, I just decided that I would do it myself, even if it meant I had to rewrite it, which, you know, normally when I write my fiction, it never goes beyond a second draft. But with my screenplay, I actually worked on about, I think, 6 or 7 drafts before it was finally ready.
We'll take the next question. Yes. The question up there.
Hi. You said you go into every finer detail while developing a character. How often you actually walk in character's shoe and live that character in yourself to deliver an organic result?
I think, you know, as all writers everywhere will tell you, we actually, you know, leave bits of ourselves. It's like a trail of our personality in each one of our characters. So there would be little details that we put into each character that comes from ourselves. But after a while, the character becomes whole, and when he becomes or she becomes whole, they actually start breathing, and to that extent, they become so dynamic that the rest of the movement ahead happens on its own pretty much, you know. So as a writer, you sometimes feel compelled to allow them find their own way through a book rather than you kind of restricting their movement. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
I mean, there's just two schools of thought. I mean, Flaubert would say that, you know, there's no question of my characters doing anything on their own because I am the master and I'm controlling them. While another novelist like you would say that characters come to life. Would you think that there are two schools to writing? Not all writers would allow characters to freely develop and go and almost take a life of their own?
I would think so. I think ultimately each writer finds what works best for them, you know, and if you realize that your characters breathe easier if you allow them to be, then you would follow that. Whereas if you find that, you know, you don't want to be told what to do by your character, then you kind of shush them down. And you know, you decide what they should say and what they should do. But for me, the joy of writing itself is being able to get into that space where I am not me and allowing my characters to rule.
A question up here.
Could you tell us, please, a little more about the new book?
Okay. Idris is the first volume of a trilogy that I'm hoping to write. And it is set in 17th century Kerala to begin with. But in this specific book, it also covers a couple of other states, which is Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. And the story of Idris is primarily the story of a Somalian trader who comes to India around that time. He comes first in 1650, and when he comes to Malabar, because it wasn't called Kerala then, when he comes to Malabar, he loses his way and has this very strange, romantic, passionate tryst with a woman. It's pretty much a one-night stand. And he goes away, and the caste laws are so stringent in Kerala at that point that even to consider coming back might have completely ruined his life and hers. So he goes away, but he comes back again 10 years later. And in Kerala around that time, in Malabar, the Zamorin had a kingship ritual that would happen every 12 years. It was called Mamangam, and all the Elegian kings would have to declare their, allegiance to him. And every year, but there was one, every 12 years, there was one kingdom that refused to accept him as their emperor, and so they would try and assassinate him. And these would basically be like 18 men against an army of 30,000 soldiers. So Idris comes again back for this festivity, and he runs into a little boy who he discovers is his son. He discovers it because he finds out who his family is and so on. And for the first time, Idris, who is this traveler who has no commitments of any sort and so on, is shaken because he realizes he has a son, and he wants to be with his child, but he can't be because again of the stringent caste rules. But he kind of insinuates himself into the family there, and they kind of accept him with no questions asked. And then the boy, who is part of this rebellious kingdom, also dreams of becoming one of the suicide warriors. So the family says, take him away for some time, show him there is more to life than this certain suicide that he would be doing if he went into war. And so the father and son set forth on a voyage, and it's about Idris's life, the women he meets, the people he meets, the things he does. At the same time, it's also about this relationship that springs up between father and son without the father ever being able to say that you are my son. And it ends with, the boy coming back.
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. But ladies and gentlemen, a big hand for Anita Nair.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.